Welcome, everyone. I'm Aaron Proffitt, Associate Professor of Japanese Studies at University at Albany. Um, and today we're going to be thinking about the Mahayana. The title for today's talk is The Mahayana Worldview. And unlike previous talks, we won't be having a PowerPoint presentation because I'm not going to give you a whole bunch of new terminology, a whole bunch of names and dates and things like that. Just some ideas that you might think with in approaching the Mahayana tradition. When we talk about the Mahayana worldview, we're not really talking about one thing. Rather, there are many Mahayanas. There are hundreds of texts and sutras, tantras, you name it, commentaries, dozens of different traditions that are spread throughout many different regions, countries, languages, all of which can be studied under this rubric of Mahayana. I'm reminded of the scholar Aaron Hughes, who notes that there is no Islam, right? So Aaron Hughes is a great scholar of Islam and Judaism. He says there's no Islam. Rather, what you have are people who identify as Muslims who make claims about this thing that we call Islam, right? And these people are in specific times, specific places, and what group A might identify as key to Islam, group B might disagree with, right? Similarly, within Christianity, right? You might have a liberal theology student living in England, and then you might have a Grand Wizard of the KKK living in rural Tennessee, and they might both identify as Christian, but what they mean by that might be radically different, okay? Now, in Mahayana is like this too. Linguists sometimes tell this joke that I really enjoy. And of course, jokes are always funnier when you also have to explain them. So the joke goes like this. What is the difference between a language and a dialect? The difference is that a language has a navy. Okay, so now what that means is that in fact, there are no languages. There are only dialects. And these dialects are always in a state of flux. Sounds change, the meanings of words change, words are added or go out of fashion. As different groups interact, we might borrow words or even borrow grammar, okay? A language, therefore, is simply the dialect that happens to gain some amount of political or economic power, right? So in the case of, London or Tokyo, that's what becomes English or Japanese, the version you might study in a textbook or in a class, whereas, let's say, Scottish or Kumamoto-ben in the case of Japan, that these are what are often called non-standard dialects, right? The Mahayana worldview is the same. There are many Mahayanas. There are many dialects of this thing we might call the Mahayana. So there's a sense in which what I'll be presenting today is somewhat subjective, but that's okay, right? I have a Mahayana worldview that is informed by many of the traditions I've studied as a scholar, as well as those that I've been lucky enough to practice throughout my life. So some of these ideas may resonate with you and some of them maybe not. But part of what I find interesting about Mahayana Buddhism is that engaging with different perspectives seems to be what the Mahayana is about sometimes, right? All right, now I've said the word Mahayana too many times and it's lost all meaning. That's okay. All right, so first things first, where did the Mahayana come from? As in our previous conversation, the previous Introduction to Buddhism, Mahayana section, we talked about this a little bit, just as a recap. The origin of the Mahayana is still somewhat mysterious. The standard view is that Mahayana Buddhism emerges somewhere around the 1st century BCE to the 1st century CE, okay? But really, that's just where the historical evidence begins. That's where texts are, identifiable in some form that we would recognize. And texts from earlier eras, if they existed, didn't survive, or perhaps it was oral before that, in which case it's lost to history. And we always have to remember that history is not the past. History is just the story that we're able to reconstruct about the past. The past is long gone, right? But there's perhaps a Buddhist lesson in that as well, that the past is forever gone. But we can try to figure out some things. But what little evidence we're able to find about this, the earlier periods, doesn't necessarily mean that's when it began. It just means that's when we can have like some historical certainty. And that distinction, I think, is important. And I don't see enough people pointing that out. Okay, so I remember this one time I was having, I was listening to this conversation between scholars of early Mahayana. So they, people who work on that as their main area. And they were agreeing amongst themselves that the phrase early Mahayana doesn't actually mean anything, because we don't really have a clear sense of the chronology. Early in relation to what is the question that they were asking each other. So in my opinion, though, this willingness to embrace ambiguity, uncertainty, this willingness to sit with the discomfort of not knowing. I think some Zen teachers talk about the don't know mind, like the mind of not knowing. Sitting with that uncertainty is perhaps also a Mahayana teaching. So on the one hand, we have sitting with that uncertainty and ambiguity and diversity is part of the academic study of Mahayana, but it may also be one of the fundamental teachings of the Mahayana. So in that case, there's kind of an art imitating life type situation going on. Remember the late John McRae and their wife Jan Nattier have both said in different texts that, if the point of Buddhism is to see the world as it truly is, and the point of Buddhist studies is to see Buddhism as it truly is, then, in a sense, we're kind of doing the same thing, whether it's from an academic perspective or a practitioner perspective. And here today in our conversation, I want to kind of, put these two together, right? So it is hard to speak about the Mahayana as a whole. And it's hard to speak about the origins of the Mahayana, right? Rather, what we have are Buddhists in particular times and places making claims based on whatever available evidence or material they have available to them, right? For some Buddhists, the Mahayana is elitist. It's the best Buddhism for the best Buddhists. But for other Buddhists, the Mahayana is about egalitarianism and openness and oneness, okay? I know which one I prefer, but as a scholar, I know that the other one is also very popular. So we can, again, see this diversity. One thing that we learn in the academic study of religion is that traditions are not monolithic. Religions are not one thing. Students of mine often come to me after my Buddhism class and they're like, what even is Buddhism? I'm like, yeah, exactly, right? That you're still asking that question after having spent 3 months studying all this diversity is a good thing. But what I tell them is that students in my Introduction to Religion class actually ask the same question. We study the history and evolution of Judaism, the diversity of contemporary Judaism, and students still say, what even is Judaism? Or Christianity, or Islam, or Buddhism, or Taoism, or Hinduism, etc., etc., etc. Religions are internally diverse, they change over time, and there's always contestation going on. And from the academic perspective, we get to see how certain claims, if taken seriously, might change or have economic or political consequences, right? Okay. So one of the things that I like to focus on is texts. Now, this is kind of a classic Buddhist studies problem. There's also the study of material culture and art and ritual and all this other good stuff, but I'm a textualist, okay? I like to delve deeply into the literary world of the Mahayana. And there's a lot about the Mahayana that you could study as literature. I remember one Buddhist teacher I heard refer to it as spiritual sci-fi, and frankly, I really dig that. I really dig that idea. So I remember that this one time I was driving with my kids, and I believe my daughter said, what do you think happens after you die? And a parenting opportunity like this, I like to ask them, what do you guys think? So my son says, I think you become a superhero. And my daughter says, I think you become one with the Force, like in that Jedi movie, right? And I said, well, guys, check it out. That's kind of the Mahayana. Some texts seem to present this idea that through these practices, you become this multiverse hopping cosmic savior figure. And others may emphasize kind of returning, there's this one idea that all the streams and rivers return to the one ocean. Maybe these are two ways of describing the same thing. Maybe what it is ultimately beyond description. So we use these different approaches to get at this thing that is kind of hard to get at, okay? So the texts that we have available to us do not simply convey information. Yeah. Rather, different people in different times are wrestling with these texts, negotiating these texts, renegotiating the meaning of these texts. They're reimagining what the text can say moment to moment. And this is even more so the case when we're talking about translations from perhaps a Prakrit in Eastern India to to Sanskrit or a Central Asian language in Central Asia or Western India into Chinese, into Japanese, into English. There's all this translation, transmission, reimagining, moment to moment, language to language, culture to culture, and yet we still keep coming back to this thing, the Mahayana. Okay. And people are the reason that we're always revisiting these texts is because our needs and our challenges change as well. So one of the great things about let's say the Lotus Sutra or a piece of great world literature, the first time you read it, maybe in school or when you're young, versus later on in your life, if you have a family and kids and some more life experience, you are a different person. Therefore, the text itself is different, right? You encounter it differently. You derive different lessons from it. Different aspects may resonate with you differently. That's one of the fun things about studying scripture. It was one of the things that I really enjoy about teaching this stuff in class is that in the beginning, students are like, what the hell is this? This is really weird. I'm like, yeah, I know it's weird. And there's 100 Sanskrit names all listed out in a row. Skim that. But also think about like what happens if you sit and read it versus if you read it out loud, versus if you're trying to visualize what the scene is presenting you. After about week 4 or 5, the students can kind of hang with the nuances of Mahayana literature and actually get something really fun from it. It's always fun to kind of watch that process, right? So when we think about the evolving nature of texts, but we may also think about the important role of debate within many Mahayana Buddhist cultures. There's kind of the classic image of the Tibetan monk. They sling their prayer beads over their shoulder and they slap, they clap, they yell. It's this very energetic form of debate. And then also in Japan, there are many traditions around Buddhist debate. Debate was a form of entertainment. It was a way for different lineages and temples to compete with one another to get patronage from the emperor. There's a story on Mount Koya, all right, that the debate hall, it faces the shrine. So you are debating and entertaining the gods at the same time. And there's a story that if someone lost in the debate, they had to leave out the western gate and commit suicide. I don't know if that really happened. That's a story. That's one of the stories you hear if you spend a lot of time on Mount Koya. Okay? Now, the importance of debate will remind us as well of various Buddhist traditions. The two that are kind of closest for me are like Zen and Shin Buddhism, where critical self-inquiry is really central. Okay, there's one Zen teacher I knew back in the day, and according to them, Zen is about critique. Actually, what he said was Buddhism is about critique, but he was a Zen teacher. I know he has a very Zen orientation. And of course, I'm thinking, well, there's also all this other stuff, but yeah, critique. I don't necessarily mean criticism. I mean engaging critically with something, asking tough questions, questioning yourself, questioning your assumptions. The famous line, of Master Lin Ji, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him," can be read to mean check your assumptions. You think you got it all figured out? That's the moment you should say, "Oh, I've gone too far." Right? Whenever you think you know everything, you need to say, "Well, do I really?" Okay. So, it's also about this questioning what we think we know, and abiding in that state of critical reflection and self-critique. The Heart Sutra, of course, says that the Bodhisattva relies on Prajnaparamita. But really, the Bodhisattva doesn't rely on anything. The Bodhisattva is unattached. So what they're relying on is not needing to rely on things, not needing to grasp. And I think that's an interesting move. Okay? All right. For some Buddhists, being a Mahayana Buddhist is about becoming a cosmic superhero. But for other Buddhists, it might be about being humble, humbling yourself in your relationships, nurturing and recognizing your dependence upon others, right? For some Buddhists, it's about transcendence, and for others, it's about recognizing your interconnectedness uh, with others. Okay? Some might emphasize the, leaving samsara behind, whereas others might emphasize that really nirvana and samsara are ultimately one. This is perhaps one way of thinking about no self, right? Thinking about that interconnectedness. The I is not necessarily the one doing the practice. You could also think of the I who practices, the famous famous Chan Koan, Nian Fo Shi, Nian Fo Zhe Shi. Who is it that says the name of Amitabha? Is it I? Is it thou? Is it something else? Is it both? Is it neither? The point is not necessarily to give the correct answer. The point is sometimes to keep asking questions. Yeah. So who was the I that practices? All right. Could be that I am the one who receives the practice, right? Or the practice arises through me, right? The practices I'm able to do, the success I'm able to manifest, all of these things are products of causes and conditions beyond our purview. When we talk about the Mahayana worldview, we can also think about diversity, right? Diversity of many different traditions, as well as the complicated nature of the human experience itself, right? We can think about Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as, emptiness taking form, the formless taking form, emptiness arising as compassionate means. We could think about Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as expressions or aspects of our own mind and body. We could think of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as sources of Buddhist power that we limited foolish beings can call upon, that other power that we can draw upon. Yeah. In many cases, people do both. And I think that's really interesting. Is the Buddha within? Is the Buddha without? Is it both? Is it neither? Is it something else? Keep going. And in both of these cases, I think what we can see Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as like living dynamic symbols that are supporting us along the path. And when I say symbol, I don't mean just some abstract idea. I mean something much deeper than that, something that is real in a way that I think we often don't recognize. So not just a symbol, not just psychological, but also not just external either. There's something else going on that is very interesting in Mahayana texts. Now, in my case, the first thing that I learned about when I began thinking about the Mahayana tradition, the first thing I learned about when I started learning about Buddhism is the idea of the Bodhisattva vow to save all beings, without exception. Now, when I learned about this idea, I was a young teenager living in rural Tennessee, struggling with some contradictory elements of the Christian culture I was raised in. Now, on the one hand, I had my father, who taught me that to be a good Christian means to be of service to others, to help those in need, even if it's hard for you. Yeah, he would tell me stories about his father buying shoes for poor children, figuring out ways to use his moving company, because that's what I did growing up, is moving furniture. So I did growing up, so my dad did and still does. It's what his father did. And when people are moving, they often want to get rid of furniture. They want to lighten the load. Yeah. So my grandfather apparently came with this idea for a store to sell people or give away this furniture for people in need, right? So that's the example that my dad would often invoke for what it meant to be a good Christian, is to be of service to others, and that resonated with me. That's still with me very much today. But on the other hand, I would also see people in my community who basically used Christianity as an excuse to be racist, homophobic, sexist, elitist, and so on. And that contradiction really bothered me. So learning about the idea of a bodhisattva who vows to save everyone, right? Not just those who belong to the right religion or the right or the race or the right, sexual expression or whatever, but everybody. That made sense to me, and on some deeper level, when maybe karmic causes and conditions that connected. immediately, and has kind of remained the thing that I keep coming back to, right? To be of service to others, to to want to help all beings. So we might think about the four bodhisattva vows. Sentient beings are limitless. I vow to save them all. Blind passions, afflictions are limitless. I vow to extinguish all of them. Dharma gates, approaches to learning about the nature of reality, are limitless. I vow to master them all. The Buddha way is unsurpassed. I vow to attain it. So we have these goals that are kind of not, I don't want to say impossible, but they will require being comfortable, being uncomfortable. They will require entering into a mode of practice that may be endless. To have that don't know mind, to have that never give up spirit. But also, it's not something that you on your own are supposed to manifest. You have others you can rely upon, Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, but also your community. These are also the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, your family members, your friends, the people around you. All can be Bodhisattvas that you rely upon and work together with. The attainment of Buddhahood is not supposed to be about the solitary male individual, it's often male, right? Male individual on the hero's journey. Like for some Buddhists, that's the view. But I think in Mahayana, especially, we often have this view that we're in this together, that all beings are in process together. Yeah. We could say that, challenges come and go. There will be another. And the Bodhisattva says, bring it on. I kind of dig that. Okay. Now, one of the things that I enjoy about studying pre-modern East Asian Buddhism is that you have to kind of study a little bit of everything. So in the case of Japan, we've got Tendai and Shingon and Zen and Keigon and Jodo Shinshu and Jodoshu and all this stuff. There's so many different approaches. In Japan today, those are seen as different things. Each one has a head temple with official texts and official teachings. But in the pre-modern context, a Buddhist practitioner may go study with many different masters from many different backgrounds. And sometimes I like to compare it to a college major, right? Just because you're a biology major and now you're taking a chemistry class doesn't mean you've converted. You're just broadening your horizon. You're deepening your education. Yeah. Say you're a biology major, you're going to take physics and chemistry and lots of biology classes. You may also take a class on Shakespeare, Japanese religions, or whatever. Like, students study all kinds of different stuff to have that breadth. And when you look at the biographies of a lot of these monks, they're doing the same thing. Yeah. So in my own research, I study esoteric Pure Land Buddhism. The way you get things done in the world in medieval Japan is through esoteric ritual. Of the things you might want to accomplish, Buddhahood in this body, extending your lifespan, success, good luck, perhaps slaying your enemies on the battlefield, or attaining rebirth in the Pure Land. Attaining rebirth in the Pure Land was one of the most popular things, so it makes sense to study esoteric Pure Land approaches. So we get to think broadly across traditions if we spend time studying Chinese Buddhism, Korean Buddhism, Vietnamese Buddhism, pre-modern Japanese Buddhism as well. Okay. So I want to point out a couple of the ways that these Mahayana ideas show up within particular traditions, but just know that these traditions also feed into a lot of different things, right? In Japan today, we have this distinction between the comprehensive approaches, like let's say Tendai, Shingon, Keigon, Hoso, et cetera, where you're doing some esoteric practice, you're doing some philosophy, you're maybe doing some Pure Land practice or Zen, or like you can do a little bit of everything. Then we have the so-called single practice schools, Nichiren, Pure Land, and Zen, okay? And as I'm presenting these different approaches, I'll sometimes ask my students, like, which one do you find compelling? Like, which approach, right? Not which school of Buddhism or whatever, like a comprehensive approach where you do a little bit of everything, or a single practice approach where you focus in on one thing. Yeah. And last semester or the year, maybe the year before, it was 50-50. About half the students were like, I like the comprehensive approach, like a salad bar, a little bit of everything, right? Then there's the other side where it's like, well, it's kind of nice to have one thing. Yeah. And one of the interesting things about those single practice schools is that that one thing actually contains all the other stuff too. Yeah. That's kind of the point. So if, Honen says just rely on the Nembutsu, but we have to remember that Honen's claim just rely on the Nembutsu is backed up by centuries of Tendai and Shingon and Keigon and Hoson and, Sanron and so on. All these other, Buddhist thinkers trained in many different traditions saying that all this stuff that we're doing in philosophy and meditation and esoteric ritual can be contained within the single Namo Amida Butsu. Yeah. So that's why you can say just rely on Namo Amida Butsu, because all the other guys have been saying for generations, it's all contained in there. Yeah. So it's as if it's a single practice that actually covers all other things. Okay. So anyway, one tradition I'm particularly interested in is Tendai. Tendai has this interesting teaching called the Three Truths. Now in classical Mahayana with Nagarjuna and Madhyamaka school, we have the two truths of emptiness and the provisional reality, ultimate reality, provisional reality, and so on. Well, Juri conceives of a middle position, the emptiness, provisional reality, and the middle. And this is the idea that perhaps a bodhisattva can see the big picture. They can understand emptiness, but they can also understand the unique individual perspective of a suffering being. I like to compare this to perhaps a hypothetical hippie friend who says, hey man, it's all energy, man. It's all just oneness, man. It's like, okay, sure, yes, it is all just energy. But I'm the type of being from this perspective that is experiencing pain or hunger or sadness or suffering. And that's real too in its way. So the bodhisattva is able to encompass both, to understand the subjective and the objective, the individual, the universal all together. And that's one way to understand this middle teaching. Okay? These ideas are pervasive in East Asian Buddhism. Again, don't think about a sectarian framework. This is an idea that can be found all over the place, right? Next, we have Zen. One of the fun things about Zen is Zen says we are, do not rely on words and letters. And yet in the hyper literary culture of East Asia, some of the most important writers have been Zen monks. I love it, right? They write a lot about not needing words, okay? One of the cool ideas in Zen is this idea that nothing is static, nothing is set in stone, right? And the universe is fluid, right? That you can't rely on any one thing, yeah? There's discipline, there's practice, but there's also fluidity and openness. One way to put it, kind of referencing the poetry in the poetry contest in the famous Platform Sutra. Through your practice, you keep polishing the mirror, even though you understand that there's nowhere for the dust and grime to collect. I think that's an interesting idea. Okay. Next, we have esoteric Buddhism, which often emphasizes embodiment, the immanence of Buddhahood. I was just having a conversation with students the other day about how, the descriptions of practice, the descriptions of mandalas and so on, often make reference to the body. It's a very physical tradition. Not to mention the fact that many of the ascetic practices are physically demanding. The philosophical aspects are often making reference to the physical human form. Buddhahood in this body, not Buddhahood somewhere far away, the next life or whatever, but right here and now. And there's this interesting theory called the eternal yoga of the six elements, that the mental and physical elements of the universe, consciousness itself, is embedded within and one with that which is physical. So we are literally made of Buddha reality, but we forget that. And we get stuck in our mistaken views, but through practice, you can awaken to the fact that, it's not becoming Buddha in this body, it's realizing this body already is Buddha. Yeah. All right. Another important touchstone is Huayan or Keigon thought, based in the Avatamsaka Sutra. There's this microcosm, macrocosm idea that my practice is not separate from your practice. My efforts are not separate from the efforts of the Buddha. Yeah. But one of my teachers said recently that perhaps the point of the Flower Garland Sutra, the Avatamsaka Sutra, is not, hey, here's the 52 stages of the Bodhisattva path, but maybe the point is, and it's right here, right? A million Buddhas in a single grain of sand, that the so-called 52 stages of the Bodhisattva path can actually be right here, right now. Yeah. Okay. Next, we have the Shin Buddhist tradition, the tradition that has, for much of my life, been kind of my, spiritual center of gravity. I've always been interested in this idea of mutual dependence, that we depend upon one another, as well as this critical self-reflection. Now, as a scholar of religion, I generally am skeptical of claims made by elite dudes sitting on platforms wearing golden clothing. That's just a thing. And the Shin Buddhist path is as well. They're skeptical of the people who spend a lot of time sitting around talking about emptiness. That doesn't necessarily mean you understand emptiness. In fact, there often seems to be in a reverse correlation there, right? So there is this critique of oneself, critique of people in positions of power within religions that are making claims to power over other people. There's rather this critique of this samsaric world, this aspiration for the Pure Land, which can be another way of expressing emptiness. That the things of this world are not to be relied upon. So you focus on the Pure Land, and then you read the Pure Land Sutras, and what do beings in the Pure Land experience? What are the birds preaching? What does the light of the Bodhi tree convey to you? Emptiness, right? So these things are all connected. They're all kind of vectors for proxies for presenting emptiness in a way that can, get your attention and resonate deeply with you. Ultimate reality is ultimately beyond words, and yet words is what we have. So we use words, ideas, images, mythic literary narratives to touch that deeper truth, right? And we live in a culture where people like to read a lot of books, and for many people, myself included, we often encounter Buddhism through these books. But in fact, I have found the most real Mahayana experiences in community, in potlucks, in opportunities to challenge and be challenged along the path. Yeah, opportunities where I fail at living up to expectations or things of that nature, right? Those are opportunities for reflection and thinking upon all the things that we depend upon to progress along the path. And that, for me, is one of the keys to the Mahayana worldview, is that recognition that we depend upon others. It's not just about me. It's not just about the individual pursuit. It's about all of us together. And that allows you to tap into a power that is greater than the self. That's no self. That's emptiness. That's all these ideas kind of showing up in a potluck, right? So anyway, I'm going to conclude there. I look forward to ongoing conversations. Some of you have been sending me emails, and I really appreciate that. Some of you say, please post more things. Some of you make requests, and I really enjoy that too. So let's keep exploring this stuff together. Thank you for your time.